Hello, and welcome to Two Pews in a Pod. Join us as we explore faith in a modern world at Evangelical Lutheran Church in Frederick, Maryland. Now, here is your host, Pastor Paul Baglios.
I'm Paul Baglios.
And I'm Megan Wyant.
And we welcome you to this 7th episode of 8 planned episodes in our series, Faith and Vocation. We are joined today by Alan Perdue, a member of Evangelical Lutheran Church, among other things, a former president of this congregation. Alan has been a guest on this podcast in a previous series. We're happy for you to be with us today. We would have had 2 members of the congregation for this podcast episode, as we have had for the previous episodes in this series. But because of some scheduling difficulties today, Alan, you're batting by yourself here.
He's in the hot seat.
And we're going to be talking about faith and the vocation of the law. Alan is an attorney. And why don't we begin by you telling us what the work is that you do or have done as a lawyer?
Sure. I'll start at the beginning and kind of move quickly through that. The first couple of years of my legal career were with what you'd call a corporate defense kind of law firm of about 25 attorneys that was in Charleston, West Virginia. And we did do a lot of work for corporations and banking work and some litigation defense work. I got increasingly interested in litigation and ended up joining a litigation firm of plaintiffs' lawyers, sometimes colloquially called ambulance chasers. We did personal injury cases. We did medical malpractice cases. All of those kinds of almost always plaintiff litigation work. And then I got back to working with the guy who had been the senior partner, the managing partner of my first law firm when he became West Virginia's Attorney General. I joined the Attorney General's office under him. And he was a guy that I had immense respect for his professional ethos and the career that he had had. And I got assigned to work with higher education, and eventually that led me to moving up to the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia in 1991 and working with then Shepherd College, which has become Shepherd University since. And I've been there for the last 33 years as the in-house attorney for the university.
I didn't realize it was that long that you've been at Shepherd University.
And that work really rounds out an amazing canvas of different topics that come in. We are a state agency, so I'm doing intergovernmental relations and state legal compliance topics. Higher ed, the compliance aspects in higher ed with the U.S. Department of Education and all the rules that come out that are linked to a large degree to the financial aid programs that they provide for students, produces an enormous amount of legal compliance work for us. It's a $60 million a year operation, so there's an enormous amount of personnel, law, contracts work on a constant basis. Slip and fall cases from people and things like that happen, accidents that happen on the campus. It's pretty much if you can imagine it as being something that comes up in the law in higher ed, you wind up working with it.
Wow.
You made a reference to ambulance chasers, and I'm going to follow up on that and acknowledge that there is within our culture there's a lot of humor that I think is ill-tempered regarding lawyers.
Sure.
A lot of disrespectful, bad lawyer jokes. And certainly there are disreputable lawyers, as there are disreputable clergy and disreputable people in any vocation or occupation or profession. I do not share any of those attitudes. Perhaps naively and through my own ignorance, I have a very idealized and very honorable and respectful view of the practice of law. I think that, as you know, that the practice of law is the exercise of justice, however approximate it may be. It is undertaken so that people, organizations, corporations can be accountable to one another and not simply take advantage of one another, leaving people without recourse. And in that regard, I think of the practice of the law as very holy and part of God's care for the well-being of human communities and human lives.
I think that's absolutely correct, and it harkens me back to something that I really enjoyed when I was in law school. So the contracts professor, Uncas McThenia, he gave me a paper he had written. It was probably about 5 pages long, and its focus was on how the Judeo-Christian experience had made it possible for Anglo-American law, European and Anglo-American law, to develop through the Middle Ages and into the modern society, because the ethos of promise, commitment, that is so much an important part of our ethical and Christian beliefs, but it's something that was embedded in the Jewish law in the ancient times and still is, and that is not a universal precept. That in business transactions, in some cultures, there is a focus on how does one maximize one's financial results,
Right.
whatever it takes to get there. And in the development of contract law built around the sanctity of promise, Anglo-American law has really made contract law work in a fundamental way that has not been duplicated, and it's why it became such a predominant foundation of international law. Is that ethos around promise really makes contract law happen. And I thought it was brilliant. It was obvious that he lived that philosophy himself, and it immediately became an early formative thought for me about the way Christian faith and the practice of law and the implementation of justice really plays out.
One of the books I'm currently reading is a recently published history of Christianity, or better described as a history of the influence of Christianity on mostly Western cultures and civilizations, and makes points similar to what you're saying. And I love that phrase, the sanctity of promise.
Right. I mean, that's covenantal language, right?
Yes.
That we talk about
Yeah,
so
exactly.
much. So I when you said that, I just sat back and I'm not sure I'm going to look at a contract the same way now. And it's like, sign here. I don't want to read it. But that idea that it's, rooted in Christianity and in faith for you is a big.
It is, and it contracts become a way for us, coming from two or maybe 3 or 4 parties, all coming from different places and different perspectives,
Right.
working to a set of agreements that, by reaching all of these detailed agreements that makes a person's eyes roll to the back of their heads, everybody can go forward safely to produce the good thing that we're trying to do in our project.
Right. Yeah.
And there is, as I said, I see a holiness in this. It is honoring a promise. It is honoring one's word. It is being a person of honesty and integrity, that what you see is what you get in the world, that we will not live together as human beings simply by trickery and duplicity, that we will be transparent with and accountable to one another. And the practice of law helps us to do that.
It does. And for me, I don't approach the complex topics with the starry-eyed Boy Scout kind of naivete. And that's commendable. But at the same time, and in my higher ed work, I've had this kind of conversation with every institutional president I've worked for, that I need for them to understand I can go away if that's what they need at any time. All they got to do is let me know that this is not going to work out for me. I can go do something else. But for me, in my work, there are some base values that I will not lie to people. I will not do that. And I think it's worked out fine for us and for me in my work.
And there are similarities here. There are many similarities, I think, between the practice of law and the practice of public ministry leadership.
Yeah.
You know, you and I, Megan, we too, and others who are or will be ordained and called, one of the fundamental ethical expectations is that we will not lie, that we will be true to our word, that what we say to people we will follow through on, that we will guard the sanctity of promise. Not only the sanctity of God's promise to the creation, but the promises we may make in the name of God, in the care and service of people who have called us.
Yeah, and all I keep thinking of is baptismal promises, right? That work of like seeking justice is something a promise we make in baptism, justice for all, and that the work that you do can be a means to do that. And so having this set of like ethos or this belief set of I am not budging on this, I think is really admirable.
Yeah, and in the broader question of justice, that is one of the areas where I think produces some of the lawyer jokes. My father loves lawyer jokes. But
he wasn't a lawyer, was he?
No, not at all. No, he just loves to send them at me. But he does. It's
of course.
But there are presumptions about lawyers who will do anything to win their case, and the real point about working in the legal field for clients is to help them in an honest way present their side of the case. The late Justice Potter Stewart described trials as being a scenario where it's almost like two cars are driving down the street and deliberately crashing into each other, and then the jury looks at that crush and says, okay, here's what happened. Here's our judgment about what happened. It's a collision in the trial arena, and you represent your client with a lot of advocacy, but if you're honest in your presentation of the facts that you know, and you know, I can honestly say that in almost 40 years of practicing law, I've never had a client in front of a judge saying something that I knew was false. That matters to me, to know that we've presented through the years in all the different scenarios where I've been involved in some kind of legal proceedings. I've never had to walk away and say, oh my goodness, do I feel okay about that?
Yeah.
I've been able to do this work, I feel like, with genuine integrity, and you do have different approaches and different opinions and beliefs about different people who are clashing in some kind of a legal dispute, whether it be a business matter or a personal matter or whatever else it is. But you just present the information honestly, and this is what we have judges for, is to apply the law to all of that input of what the factual nuances are, and that's where justice comes.
Yeah.
And it's a system that fundamentally works well. You have unfortunate, tragic scenarios where somebody isn't always committed to just presenting clean truth. But if you can work through that, if you have a judge that can control the case in a way to make sure that you get that produced effectively from each side, you get a genuine result you can feel good about.
And I like what you said too. Lawyers implement and apply the law. Legislators, enact the laws, pass the laws,
Right.
but without lawyers, it just remains words on paper. The work of lawyers turns those words on paper into agreements, commitments, settlements. I'll say, however approximate our apprehension of justice may be in any situation.
Yeah. And for all the lawyer jokes, the minute something goes wrong and you
Yeah.
feel wronged, who do you want to call?
Yeah.
Everybody wants to have a lawyer on their
Sure.
team,
Yeah.
right? On their side. Tell us about your shirt. So I happen to notice that there are scales, Alan, on your shirt.
Yes, the shirt is a logo of the scales of justice, which I've had a scale of justice, in one form or another, on a desk or somewhere in the house, and then we found this shirt just about a year and a half ago, and I really like it. It's a nice subtle way of just depicting this is what I'm
who
all
you
about.
are. Yeah.
I knew I wanted to do this work since I was probably like 8 years old.
Huh.
And so I've been blessed to be able to do what I wanted to do with my life's career right from the get-go.
That is a blessing.
Not everybody has that.
Absolutely. What I think is striking about scales too is that, right, we're at an equal balance, because sometimes, right, what is equal for one does not feel equal for the other, and yet you're at that kind of homeostasis,
Yes.
the shalom, right,
Yeah.
of it all.
It can be the difference between equality and equity.
Yes, exactly.
Equity is a search for balance that equality,
Quality,
rigidly
yes.
applied, may not
Isn't always that.
provide.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And you have a great eye for detail. I would not have. I mean, I saw that there's a
a
print on
pattern.
your shirt, but I didn't notice the detail of the scales of justice. I'm intrigued to hear you say more about since you were 8.
I know.
What moves an
8-year-old
8-year-old to think I'd like to become an attorney?
I think it was a TV show. And the TV lawyers in the 1960s you'll remember this, were a lot different from the TV
Yeah.
lawyers you see in the modern era. And there was a lot more focus on the principle of being an attorney and of that work. I mean, and I think that was the lead into it. I mean, I am in the group of people who think about things like To Kill a Mockingbird.
I was gonna
as
say.
Oh, yeah.
I was
one of
gonna
the
say,
great,
yeah.
great
Atticus Finch.
illustrations
Yep.
of the ethos of working as an attorney and what that can mean and all of that, I think, from a very early time. And then I think that early impact and the fact that I began to realize that although I'm often very shy with people, I can talk. And I
Yeah.
can be pretty good at talking, and I love to read. So all those things work because there's a lot of reading.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of reading. So
Well, and
I
I've
think that's
often
fantastic.
said, I may even have said to you, I say this as a humorous comment, but there's serious intention. If I could get my wife to support me through one more degree, it would be a degree in
Oh
law.
my gosh. Are you a lifelong Lutheran?
I'm not. Our church when I grew up was an independent church initially, and then joined the Kansas City centered Holiness Churches Church of God group as fundamentalism, not the Pentecostalism that is animated, but we were definitely not an animated church. As a general,
you were sedate in your pursuit of holiness.
Yeah, pretty low key. But yeah, that was the church I grew up in. And then as I got older, I got into the Methodist Church and was going to the Methodist Church, United Methodist Church, for a pretty long time.
Okay, I only think for the obvious reasons of maybe. In your reading, I know that you do lots of reading, and that is one of the things that most impressed me. I thought I was going to hate Luther's writing and the Reformers' writings, but to find that they are so concise and give such great explanation, and I'm like, that's a lawyer, right?
Much
that
of it is, yes.
One exactly, because that is what he studied. To me, it was a refreshing thing, and I think to you it would be similar of reading it and going.
As I got to know Helene and was going regularly with her on Sundays to her church initially, and then we started looking for Lutheran churches as we were lining up getting married down here and living in Frederick. That was frankly exactly my go-to path was, okay, I got to really start understanding a little more about Martin Luther than what I have up to this point.
Yeah.
So that was fun because it is a very approachable collection of documents to work through.
Well, we are so grateful that you took the time to be with us here and record this episode. The conversation could certainly continue on, but it will not be the last time we get to speak with you about these things. We are grateful for your faithful witness and your dedication to this congregation. Thank you for making the time to record this episode. We hope that this has been of interest and engagement for those who have watched or listened to this episode of Two Pews in a Pod. I'm Paul Baglios.
I'm Alan Perdue.
And I'm Megan Wyant. Thank you for joining us.
This has been Two Pews in a Pod, a podcast hosted by the lead pastor of Evangelical Lutheran Church in Frederick, Maryland. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.